Salam, peace be upon you. My name is Muhammad Layak Siddiqui, the father of Holophase, Part 24, Composition, How Phi Patterns Combine and Why Failure Also Reveals Pattern. Pattern is primary. Phi is circular comparability. Only relations are public. All material assumptions must be declared. Every claim must declare its type. Pattern, claim, certificate, artifact are distinct. Every claim comes through a declared window. First, we read difference. To read local change, we use lifts. Patterns have layered local signatures, read only to finite depth. From one pattern, we read three faces: cadence, texture, flow. Pattern language has limits: domains, excisions, aliasing. Boundaries are part of pattern identity. Global patterns exist as lawful stitching of local charts. Stitching reveals global memory, winding, holonomy. Defects are stable topological features. Identity is invariant equivalence under declared lawful transformations. Canonicalization enables comparison but does not create identity. Deep understanding means finding the invariant generating core. Persistence is certified survival of identity through change. A pattern may exist but not be legible. Null is the disciplined verdict when no pattern is certifiable. Some patterns care about direction. Orientation and chirality matter. Reversal bookkeeping tracks changes under flipping sign, space, and time. Interaction is joint constraint. Patterns are coupled when they cannot be described independently. The moment we ask, how do patterns combine? We have learned what patterns are, how to identify them, how they persist, how they interact. Now we face a natural question. How do patterns combine? This matters everywhere. Flour and water combine to make dough. Two people combine to make a relationship. Two ideas combine to make a new insight. Two scientific descriptions combine to make a fuller picture. But here is the truth this chapter must teach. Composition is not automatic. Two things being near each other does not mean they can combine. Two patterns interacting does not mean they form a stable, larger whole. Two descriptions that seem similar may resist lawful union. Composition is lawful and conditional. It requires declared compatibility. And when it fails, that failure is not just disappointment. It is precious information about the patterns themselves. A simple everyday image, the wrong key. Think of a key and a lock. They are both metal objects. They are in the same room. They touch. Yet they may not compose into a working lock and key system. The wrong key tells you something precise about the lock: its shape, its mechanism, its requirements. The failure is not empty. It is structured information. This is our guide for the whole chapter. Composition failure is not the end. It is data. Why composition is not automatic? In ordinary thinking, we often assume that if you have two things, you can just put them together, add them, combine them. The result is the sum of the parts. But this is false. Bricks alone do not make a wall. They need mortar, geometry, load-bearing compatibility, and foundation. Notes alone do not make a melody. They need rhythm, key, timing, and order. People alone do not make a team. They need trust, shared goals, and communication. Composition is not addition. It is a lawful operation that requires specific conditions to be met. The first discipline. Before asking whether two patterns do combine, ask whether they may lawfully combine at all. Interaction is not yet composition. Part 23 taught us that interaction is joint constraint. Two patterns interact when they cannot be described independently. But interaction does not guarantee composition. Two boxers in a ring interact. They do not compose into one stable larger organism. Two chemicals may react violently but fail to form a stable compound. Two strangers may affect each other briefly but never compose into friendship. Two weather systems may interfere but never settle into a new enduring whole. Interaction is necessary for many compositions, but it is not sufficient. Composition requires more: lawful fit under declared conditions. Think of dance. Two dancers can collide or obstruct each other. That is interaction. To compose into a duet requires rhythm, timing, trust, coordination, and shared movement language. Interaction may be the beginning, but composition is the achievement. Compatibility, the central law of composition. If composition is not automatic, what makes it possible? Compatibility. Compatibility is not one thing. It has several axes. A composition may succeed along one axis and fail along another. It may fit geometrically but not temporally. It may fit locally but not globally. Let us name the main compatibility conditions. Domain compatibility. Where are the patterns defined? If their domains do not overlap lawfully, composition may be undefined. You cannot overlay a map of ocean currents with a map of mountain trails without a declared overlap region. Invariant compatibility. What must each pattern preserve? If one pattern requires a condition that the other necessarily destroys, composition fails. Ice and fire do not easily compose in a small box. Their invariants conflict. Boundary compatibility. Can the edges join? Two puzzle pieces only fit if their tabs and slots match. A transplanted organ only composes with a body if immune boundaries are compatible. A cracked cup fails boundary compatibility. The tea and cup cannot compose into a stable container. Type compatibility. What kind of pattern is each? You cannot wear a song. You cannot eat a promise. You cannot marry a weather forecast. Type matters. Transformation compatibility. Can their lawful changes coexist? A paper boat and a river compose while the river is calm. When it becomes violent, transformation compatibility fails. The boat and river no longer form a stable composed pattern. Scale compatibility. Are they at the same level of resolution? A city traffic map and a molecular diagram of gasoline both speak truth about driving, but they do not compose directly without bridge rules. These are not bureaucratic details. They are the law of composition. An example from the kitchen. Let us watch compatibility in a familiar place: cooking. Flour and water compose into dough, but only under the right conditions. Too little water and the dough is dry and crumbly. Too much and it is sticky and unusable. The ratio matters. The order matters. Water into flour differs from flour into water. The temperature matters. Warm water activates yeast differently than cold. Oil and water do not compose into one stable liquid under ordinary conditions. They separate. The failure tells you something real about their molecular structure. Salt and sugar look similar, but behave differently in recipes. Swap them, and the composition fails in ways that teach you about their roles. The kitchen is a school of lawful composition. Every cook knows that ingredients do not simply add together. They interact under declared conditions, and failure is always informative. Types of composition. Composition comes in many forms. Let us name them. Order-sensitive composition. The sequence matters. Socks before shoes works. Shoes before socks does not. Flour then water may yield one texture. Water then flour may yield another. Dog bites man is not man bites dog. Path-dependent composition. The history matters. Two loaves from the same ingredients, one kneaded patiently, one rushed, yield different bread. Two friendships formed through hardship versus convenience are not the same, even if both now exist. Partial composition. Patterns may compose in some regions and not others. A medicine may help one organ and harm another. A language policy may unify one region while alienating another. Conditional composition. Composition may require specific conditions. A seed and soil compose only if water, temperature, and season cooperate. A contract and a business plan compose only if funding arrives. Regime-limited composition. Composition may work in one regime and fail in another. A bridge holds under normal loads but collapses under extreme weight. A social order holds during peace but cracks under famine. These distinctions matter because many false theories of combination imagine that if composition exists once, it exists absolutely. Part 24 refuses that simplification. Undefined composition. Now we reach one of the most important ideas. Some compositions are not merely unsuccessful, they are undefined. Suppose someone asks you to add a smell to a triangle in the same way you add two numbers. The request is not profound, it is undefined. Suppose someone asks for the average of a promise and a mountain. That is not a deep cross-disciplinary insight, it is a type error. Undefined composition also appears in serious contexts. Two regional maps with incompatible coordinate conventions may not compose until a breach rule is declared. Two scientific models may be individually valid but not jointly composable because the overlap operation has not been lawfully specified. This chapter insists that undefinedness is an allowed lawful output. Not every attempt at combination deserves a forced answer. Sometimes the honest verdict is this composition is illegal, undefined, or impossible under current conditions. That verdict is not failure. It is science behaving honestly. 9. Ambiguous and non-unique composition. Even when composition is not undefined, it may be ambiguous or non-unique. A poem translated into another language may have several lawful translations, none uniquely correct. A modular machine may be assembled from the same parts into more than one legal arrangement. A family inheritance may be interpreted through several lawful legal paths. Non-unique composition does not mean anything goes. It means the lawful space of composition contains more than one acceptable output. Ambiguity must be named where material. If more than one lawful composition exists, that multiplicity is pattern information. Composition failure as information. Now we arrive at the most beautiful principle of this chapter. When composition fails, the failure is itself information. This is not a consolation prize. It is a scientific asset. A failed composition tells you something real. It reveals incompatible invariants. What each pattern must preserve cannot coexist. Broken fit conditions. The boundaries do not match. The types conflict. Hidden assumptions. You assume domain overlap that does not exist, or scale compatibility that is absent. Scope mismatch. The patterns belong to different regimes. Impossible joins. Some things are not meant to combine, at least not under these conditions. Think again of the wrong key in a lock. The failure tells you something precise about the lock's pattern. Think of a rejected organ transplant. The failure reveals immune structure, tissue compatibility limits, and boundary law. Think of a coalition government that collapses. The failure reveals irreconcilable priorities, hidden mistrust, and incompatible rule structures. Think of a failed marriage. The failure reveals pattern, what each person needed, what they could not provide, where their invariants conflicted. Think of a failed recipe. The failure reveals the role of each ingredient, the importance of order, the sensitivity to conditions. Failure has diagnostic power. It often shows structure more sharply than success. Hidden assumptions exposed by failure. Composition failure often reveals assumptions that were smuggled in without declaration. Someone assumed the same domain. Someone assumed the same scale. Someone assumed a common coordinate system. Someone assumed boundaries could join. Someone assumed invariants could coexist. Someone assumed order did not matter. Someone assumed the path of assembly was irrelevant. When the composition breaks, these hidden assumptions come into view. This is why failure matters so much. A successful composition can hide its own conditions. It works, and so people stop asking why. But a failed composition demands explanation. It forces us to name the real compatibility criteria. Failure makes us honest. An example across scales: building a house. Let us watch composition across the scales of a single project: building a house. The foundation must compose with the soil. If the soil is unstable, composition fails. The failure tells you about the ground. The walls must compose with the foundation. If the foundation is uneven, the walls crack. The failure tells you about the interface. The roof must compose with the walls. If the pitch is wrong, rain leaks. The failure tells you about boundary fit. The wiring must compose with the electrical code. If it violates code, inspection fails. The failure tells you about type compatibility. The plumbing must compose with pressure and drainage. If pipes are too narrow, water backs up. The failure tells you about transformation compatibility. The windows must compose with the frame. If the frame warps, windows stick. The failure tells you about material transformation. The whole house must compose with weather and load. If it cannot withstand wind, it collapses. The failure tells you about regime limits. At every stage, failure is information. It teaches you about the materials, the design, the conditions, the laws. A house that stands but molds tells you about hidden composition failure: air, water, and insulation at the interface. Building a house is composition in action, and failure is always instructive. Another example: the human body. The body is a masterpiece of lawful composition. Organs, tissues, fluids, signals, and systems compose into one living whole. Heart, lungs, blood, nerves, liver, kidneys, they are not simply piled together. Their domains, boundaries, flows, and transformations are tightly regulated. A tiny failure of composition can unravel the whole. An immune system that attacks the body instead of protecting it, autoimmune disease, is a composition failure. It reveals that the boundary between self and non-self was misidentified. A heart valve that leaks is a composition failure at a mechanical boundary. It tells you about pressure, flow, and tissue fit. A cancer that spreads is a composition failure at the cellular level. Normal boundaries of growth and migration are violated. The failure reveals what those boundaries normally are. The body teaches that composition is lawful, conditional, and fragile, and every failure is diagnostic. Composition across the scales of the universe. Let us watch composition from the smallest to the largest. Letters compose into words, but not every letter string becomes a word. Some are lawful in one language, meaningless in another. Already at the smallest scale, compatibility matters. Words compose into sentences. Yet words do not compose by mere proximity. Grammar, order, and type matter. Blue Sleep Quietly River uses real words but does not compose lawfully. The failure teaches syntax. Ingredients compose into dishes. Rice and water compose differently under boiling than under freezing. Flour and yeast compose differently with warmth than with cold. Spice and sweetness may harmonize or conflict depending on ratio and order. Tools compose with tasks. A hammer composes with a nail. A screwdriver composes with a screw. Swap them carelessly and the operation fails. The failure teaches fit. Organs compose into bodies. Heart, lungs, liver. Each has its place, its boundaries, its transformations. A tiny mismatch can be fatal. The body is proof that composition is tightly law governed. Organisms compose into ecosystems: soil, water, sun, plants, animals, microbes. They form habitats. But not every species composes with every habitat. An Arctic animal in a desert fails. The failure teaches ecological requirements. Planets compose from rock, atmosphere, water, temperature, and orbital position. Change one condition too much, and the world becomes uninhabitable. Planetary composition is law governed. Stars compose from gas, pressure, gravity, and temperature. A cloud of hydrogen is not automatically a star. It must cross thresholds of density and heat. Failure to ignite tells you what thresholds were not met. Galaxies compose from stars, dust, dark matter, and cosmic history. Some mergers yield stable spirals. Some trigger bursts, some scatter structure. Cosmic composition is path-dependent and regime-limited. Across all scales, the lesson repeats. Composition is not mere togetherness. It is a disciplined achievement, and failure is always informative. Composition and emergence. Now we can glimpse what comes next. When lawful composition succeeds, new structure can appear. Water behaves differently than isolated hydrogen and oxygen. A melody is not present in isolated notes. A forest does things no single tree can do. This is emergence. But emergence is not magic. It is what may appear after lawful composition has been established. People often use emergence to hide illegal joins. They mix categories, ignore order, suppress failure, and call the result novelty. Pattern science refuses that move. First, certify the composition. Then, study the emergence. Emergence does not erase compatibility, it depends on it. The rigor layer, the composition gate. Every composition claim must pass a gate. The composition gate asks, are the compatibility conditions declared? Is the composition order specified where material? Is the domain of composition identified? Are the component types declared? Is failure tracked as information? If the answer is no, if compatibility is assumed, if order is ignored, if failure is hidden, the claim cannot be certified. The gate requires compatibility conditions: domain, invariant, boundary, type, transformation, scale, all declared. Composition order. If order matters, it must be specified. Domain of composition, where composition occurs and where it does not. Component types. Each pattern's type declared. Failure tracking. If composition fails, the failure must be recorded and interpreted. These are not bureaucratic obstacles. They are the discipline that keeps composition honest. Firewalls. What composition discipline blocks? This chapter installs several firewalls. No assuming automatic composition. Patterns do not just add together. Composition is conditional. No hiding composition failures. If composition fails, record it. Do not smooth it over. No treating all combinations as lawful. Some are illegal. That is information. No ignoring order or path dependence. If A plus B differs from B plus A, track it. No type mismatch smuggling. If types conflict, composition may be impossible. No forcing patterns together without declared criteria. Let failure speak. These firewalls protect against the most common composition errors. Refusal conditions. A composition claim should be refused if no compatibility conditions are declared. Incompatible patterns are forced together without diagnosis. Failed composition is hidden or renamed. Order or path dependence is material but not tracked. Component types are not specified. Refusal is not punishment, it is protection against forced unions and smuggled assumptions. Why this matters? Beyond science. Composition is not only for pattern science, it is for how we live. In relationships, two people do not automatically compose into a healthy partnership. Compatibility must be real, shared values, communication styles, life goals. When composition fails, the failure is information. It tells you about each person, their needs, their boundaries. In communities, different groups do not automatically compose into a harmonious society. Compatibility requires trust, shared institutions, mutual respect. When composition fails, in conflict, in fragmentation, the failure reveals hidden assumptions, broken boundaries, incompatible invariants. In knowledge, different ideas do not automatically compose into a coherent worldview. Compatibility requires logical fit, scale alignment, type discipline. When composition fails, in contradiction, in confusion, the failure reveals where thinking went wrong. In self-understanding, different parts of ourselves, our values, our desires, our habits, must compose into an integrated person. When they conflict, we experience inner tension. That tension is information about what needs attention, what needs change. Composition discipline teaches patience. Not everything that touches belongs together. It teaches humility. Not everything elegant is lawful. It teaches honesty. Failure is not shame, it is information. It teaches us to stop forcing and start listening to what the patterns themselves require. The handoff from composition to constraints. We now understand composition: lawful, conditional, informative. When patterns successfully compose, they co-constrain each other. Their joint behavior is governed by constraints, statements about what pattern features can coexist lawfully. These constraints are what we usually call equations or laws. But in Phi pattern science, they are not commands imposed on reality. They are boundaries of co-certifiability, statements about which pattern structures can be certified together. That is part 25, constraints and equations as boundaries of co-certifiable Phi pattern structure. Always, peace be upon you.